Okay. Okay. Page 22, text one. Actually, before text one, we're just going to do a quick overview, which is not, it's just about the Torah portion, not about our specific topic. The Parsha overview, which in the book is on page 20. God instructs Noah, the only righteous man in a world consumed by violence and corruption, to build a large wooden, the Hebrew word is teva, which is an ark, coated within and without with pitch, tar. A great deluge, says God, will wipe out all life from the face of the earth, but the ark will float upon the water, sheltering Noah and his family, as well as two members, male and female, of each animal species. Rain falls for 40 days and nights. The waters churn for 150 more days before calming and beginning to recede. The ark settles on Mount Ararat, and from its window, Noah dispatches a raven and then a series of doves to see if the waters were abated from the face of the earth. When the ground dries completely, which is exactly one solar year, meaning 365 days, not our regular lunar, the Jewish lunar year, after the onset of the flood, God commands Noah to exit the Teva, the ark, and repopulate the earth. Noah builds an altar and offers sacrifices to God. God swears to never again destroy all of humankind because of their deeds, and he sets the rainbow as a testimony of his new covenant with the human race. God also commands Noah regarding the sacredness of life. Murder is deemed a capital offense, and while people are permitted to eat the meat of animals, they're forbidden to eat flesh or blood taken from a living animal. This is why we have something called in Jewish life the 7 laws of Noah. We believe that while there are 613 mitzvahs in the Torah for the Jewish people, God created a much bigger family of humanity than Jewish people, and everybody is asked to lead a life of meaning. And there are 7 laws of Noah of basic decency and humanity that are mitzvahs for everyone, Jew and non-Jew. Well, they're just that's for non-Jew, and the Jews have a much more complicated set. Noah plants a vineyard and becomes drunk on its produce. 2 of Noah's sons, Shem and Japheth, are blessed for covering up their father's nakedness, while the 3rd son, Ham, is punished for taking advantage of his father's debasement. Okay, that is sure.
What's the difference between meat and flesh?
It means it's the same thing, I guess. Well, I guess with the same, because usually we call it flesh while it's on the body, and meat when it's on your plate.
Oh, okay.
So it's what it's saying is one of the 7 laws is, well, as it's presented, is don't eat the limb of a living animal, which is kind of gross.
Oh, yes.
But that's also translated into the laws of cruelty to animals.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now text 1. This is how the Torah portion begins. These are the generations of Noah. Noah had been already introduced in what we read yesterday. There's a genealogy, there's Adam and Eve and their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and Noah is introduced at the end of the Torah portion, and that he's someone of righteous character. So it says, now let's talk about Noah, the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. We're going to focus on that phrase, that qualifier, or that amplifier, whatever it may be, perfect in his generation. Doesn't say he was perfect, and I guess like nobody's perfect. Let's say he was really perfectly righteous, whatever. But in his generations, that's going to be our way into a conversation. But let's just finish the rest of it. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth became full of robbery, which in Hebrew is Hamas. And God saw the earth, and behold, it had become corrupted, for all flesh had corrupted its way in the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth has become full of robbery because of them, and behold, I am destroying them from the earth. So it's not a pretty picture. But now, let's just talk about Noah for a second. The world is horrible, corrupt. But we have this bright light, Noah. So text 2. Why does it say Noah was righteous, perfect in his generations? What does that mean? So the Talmud gives us 2 possible angles. Rabbi Yochanan says, it means in his generation he was righteous, but not relative to those other generations. We're saying Noah was a great guy when you compare him to everyone else. In other words, if he would have been in a righteous generation, he wouldn't have been a marquee guy. He was good for those times. That's Rabbi Yochanan's perspective. Next one is Reish Lakish. His study partner to this rabbi says, no. In his generation, he was righteous. All the more so would he been in other generations. No, you see, he was a rose among thorns, but how difficult is it to be a rose among thorns? When you're living in squalor, it's that much harder to live a good life. If he had been living in a better generation, with a better setting, he would have been that much better a person. So there's two perspectives here. One seeing the qualifier of in his generations as kind of being a little bit of a knock, say, in your generations you're good, but really you wouldn't have been up to snuff in Abraham's generation. And or saying no, even in his generation was good, and if he'd had people like whatever Abraham or Isaac and Sarah, whatever in his times, he would have been even better. So Rabbi Chanina, third rabbi, comes along and says, I can give you a parable for the first opinion. There's a parable for Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. To what is this matter comparable? To a barrel of wine that was placed in a cellar where vinegar is stored. In its place, its fragrance is noticeable. When it's not in its place, its fragrance is not noticeable. You have a barrel of wine, and because it's in a kind of a not great smelling, pungent area, so there's something good here. It becomes it's unique in its way, and therefore it's remarkable in its way. So that was what Noah was like. He was a barrel of wine in a storehouse of vinegar. So he stood out. Another rabbi, fourth rabbi, Oshia says, well, I'm going to give you a parable for the second opinion, Reish Lakish's opinion. To what does this matter? Comparable to a flask of perfume that was placed in a location of filth. In its place, its fragrance is notable. All the more so would it be an location where there's perfume. The filth brings down, it impacts the level of fragrance and your appreciation of the fragrance. Imagine if it was at a Macy's perfume counter, you'd appreciate it more rather than in a tannery, right? Okay, so main thing is Noah, in retrospect, Torah says he's great, says in his generations, there are two ways the Talmud is looking at it. Either taking down a notch as far as his caliber of righteousness, one actually putting him up a notch, saying that even in his generation, how much better would he have been if he'd been allowed to work that way? So now, that's a Talmudic perspective. So now we have a question. Rabbi Yeshua, and our question is, why would you interpret this negatively if you can interpret it positively? Like, what do we want from the poor guy? He's dead. And why are we doing this, Rabbi? So let's take a look at text 3, which is 24. A basic Torah principle. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, a person should never express a crude matter as the formulation of a verse was distorted by the addition of 8 letters rather than have it express a crude matter. As it is stated, from the pure animals and the animals that were not pure. I'm going to explain this. In Torah thinking and Talmudic thinking, and this was something you saw in the Rebbe very much, said even when you're going to say something negative, try to be gentle about it and be careful with your words. And the example that the Talmud gives is actually in this week's Torah portion. It says, Noah said, take of the animals that are pure, and then the animals that are, what's the opposite of pure? Impure. So it says, or in the Hebrew word, the Hebrew would be tameh, defiled, whatever. But the Torah doesn't say from the animals that are pure and the animals that are impure, that Hebrew word tameh. It says from the animals that are pure and the animals that are not pure. Saying that something is not pure is different than saying directly that they're impure. Now you say it's just semantics. Semantics means something. And the Rebbe was very careful about that in his speech and how we teach children to speak to each other, not to be harsh in the language, because words mean things. And he takes that from the Talmud, from the Torah. So the question here is we try to take, even when something negative, you want to try and take couch it a little bit more, not in a harshly negative way. Why would we say to take an attitude, say Noah? What the Torah is saying is Noah was a good guy, but not so good. Why do you have to go there? Just what's forcing you to say that? Just say. But in this generation, in his generation was how much more than another one, or leave it alone. So if you take a look at here, another element, another tack on it, and then we're going to get back to this. This is from the Zohar, from the an attitude to Noah, based on this is from the fundamental textbook of Kabbalah. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Come and see. How do we understand Noah? So when Moses prayed to God, he didn't rely on his own merit, but rather on the merit of his forefathers. Noah, by contrast, didn't have anyone whose merit he could rely on like Moses did." So Rabbi Yehuda, he's saying, we have a problem. There's a functional problem. Why is anybody picking on Noah? Because God says to him, I'm going to destroy the world. Everybody but you and your family and the animals. And build an ark. And that ark is going to take you a long time to build, but you'll save yourself. We don't find Noah saying to God, whoa, why do you mean kill everybody? Like Abraham did when God, we'll see in a couple of weeks, when God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom. Or like Moses did when God said, that golden calf, I'm getting rid of them, I'll make another people out of you. Moses says, no. We also don't find that all the time, I don't know if when I was a kid, there was a Bill Cosby skit, Noah's Ark. Remember that? So the idea of he's building the ark. It took him a very long time. The point was, the Talmud tells us, that people would pass by and say, "What you building?" Say, an ark. Why are you building an ark? Because the end is nigh. Because God's going to destroy the world. Repent now. Sorry, look at the world around us. We gotta fix it up. We don't find that one person, he convinced one person to change themselves. God said it'll be you and your family and the animals. And then in a few years later, when his ark is done, who goes onto the ark? Exactly who God said. In other words, not a single neighbor said, oh, yeah, I'm going to change my ways. Oh, I see the lights. He didn't convince one person. And we're saying is he didn't even pray. How can you not pray for them? So Rabbi Yehuda says, when Moses prayed to God, look what he says. He says, God, remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember Sarah, remember our ancestors. We come from good people. Their merit, maybe it's not my merit, but the merit of our ancestors, please save these people. Moses felt he had more standing to push back against God because it wasn't just him. He was representing a people and great ancestors. Noah was before all those ancestors. He said he didn't have. So Rabbi says, have some mercy on the guy. He's there alone. God says, I'm going to destroy everyone. What's he going to say? Abraham, these people are not there yet. In whose merit is he going to be praying? So Rabbi Yehuda said, what was he going to pray? He couldn't. Maybe he would have if he could have, but he couldn't. Rabbi Yitzchak responds. Rabbi Yitzchak takes the more negative attitude and says, even so, once God told Noah, I will establish my covenant with you, Noah should have pleaded for mercy on the people. Once he knew that there was something special between him and God, he should have at least asked. He should have said, God, please have mercy on these human beings. Instead, he waited until after the flood to offer a sacrifice. Should have brought it earlier. Maybe it would have calmed God's anger and spared the world. So there's, again, this debate, whether seeing him in a positive light or a negative light. Rabbi Yehuda replied, but one second, what could he have done? The people of the world were guilty and constantly provoked God. And Noah was afraid for himself. He didn't want to put his own life at risk by getting involved. He saw how corrupt they were, how they angered God every single day, and didn't want to be caught in their downfall. So there's something to be said. Self-preservation is a value. So what's he supposed to do? Start telling these people they'll kill him. What are these two attitudes different than the ones in the Talmud? Here we're saying, let's say you couldn't have done anything. At least it should have bothered you. Pray to God. Say something. That's one perspective. The other perspective is, what's he going to pray? Why would he think he has the standing to change God's mind? It's not like he has the ancestors to invoke. And to say something to them, they would have killed him. So we have these two perspectives, one positive, one negative. And really the question is, like, what are these what's bothering these sages, these great, and if they're Torah sages, you gotta think they're loving, respectful people, and Noah is someone who respects the Torah. Why are you so bent on finding a negative light to put him in? So let's look at text 5. There is a Talmudic idea that when there are disagreements amongst great minds, often it's one sage said one thing, another said something else, but they're not really arguing. If you drill down and you see, like, what were their interests, where were they coming from, you can see that they're both saying things of value, but they're nuanced. So one sage is saying something, and from that perspective, you can take it stands, and that perspective, the other one from a slightly different perspective, that stands. So not necessarily totally arguing. There's a reconciliation when you drill down to what was bothering them or what was driving them, what was their real mindset, and that's a value in when we're studying, because Talmud's full of debates, and that's fine. But the thing is to try to understand. It's not just a debate; it's a debate of mindset, and often they're closer than they appear. And this is from a great rabbi of the 1500s. He says, there's a quote in the Talmud we just read, text 6:27. One sage said one thing, another said something else, but they're not arguing. What does that mean? Even when it seems like these two sages disagree, the Talmud explains that one is speaking about a specific angle, case, and the other about a different angle. So there's no real conflict. This kind of resolution appears often throughout the Talmud. That's a Talmudic thing. Now he's saying, for our mindset, a person should train themselves to look deeply and use their intellect to reconcile differing opinions whenever possible, whether in the Talmud or among halachic authorities. So this is a value in Torah scholarship, to see, not only to understand Maimonides says this and Nachmanides says that, but to drill deeper and say that they shared a Torah perspective. There's obviously a nuance of difference, but it's not as stark a difference as it appears on the surface. And often they're not really arguing because they're coming from different angles. So now, here's something that I would say. Rabbi Yitzchok, the one who put it who put Noah in a better light in the Zohar, he says he agrees that no, I'm sorry, that was the second one. The one who was the negative light. He agrees that the reason Noah didn't pray his generation is because in his situation he simply couldn't. As the Zohar says, he didn't have anyone who's married he could rely on like Moses did. This wasn't a personal failing in Noah. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak is the one who said, even if he didn't have the sages to rely on, like Rabbi Yehuda had mentioned, it says still he should have at least brought an offering. He should have prayed. He should have tried to do something, and he should have cared enough. And that's what Rabbi Yitzchak is saying. Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is the one who had brought that he didn't have the standing because he didn't have the great ancestors to invoke. Rabbi Yitzchak's intention is only to prevent a possible misunderstanding in later generations, lest someone think that failing to pray for others isn't a flaw. That's why Rabbi Yitzchak insists we must interpret this aspect of Noah's story as a shortcoming, not because it was a shortcoming in Noah himself, but to make it absolutely clear that failing to pray for others is a flaw in general. People, let's say, we look back at the Holocaust. I wasn't alive then, but I remember growing up with hearing criticisms of some Jewish leaders in the United States for not being vocal enough of what was going on, some political leaders for not being active enough. And that may all be true. But let's say there was someone who really wanted to, but there's no way they could have done it for whatever reason. And if you were presented with their situation, it's very hard to judge people going back a century or to know exactly what they're going through. There are variables that don't show up necessarily in the history books, why that person didn't take a stand. So if it's about criticizing that person, they were immoral because they didn't take a stand or take out an ad in the New York Times or speak before Congress or write letters, to the entire country about what was going on with people dying in the concentration camps and in the ovens. We can't necessarily don't have the standing or the knowledge to necessarily criticize individuals because we don't know what their restrictions are, what their restraints are. We don't know what was going on. One thing we do know is that in a vacuum, when there's something going on, when there's inhumanity going on, say something, stand up. So for history, if we're going to criticize a specific rabbi or a specific politician saying, you didn't say anything during the Holocaust, it shouldn't be about saying that was a bad person, because we don't know what everything went into their decisions. But if, as a lesson for generations, that conduct, that's not don't try this at home. If you can do something, do it. Whether or not they were able to do it, that's not our business. That's between them and God. It's not about analyzing. We don't have the place to analyze their character and say whether they were moral or not. But as the behavior taken in the abstract, in humanity, going on, say something. So what I was saying is about these rabbis who are pointing to Noah and saying either, well, he was okay in his generation because he stuck out as the only moral guy, or which was negative, or he should have at least he should have at least said something. What they're saying is that we're not in a position to judge who Noah was. We don't know. Maybe they were about to kill him if he said something. Maybe he didn't feel enough closeness to God. This was all new to him, and he didn't have the background and understand the great ancestors to follow to rely on. For us, it's a luxury to look back and say, I would have done better, or they should have done better. That's not what the exercise are going through. What the Rebbe is saying, these rabbis are saying it so for posterity. We study and our children study that when someone is a Noah, when there is going to be when there's suffering going on or impending suffering in the world, they should do something. Pray, speak, do something. It's not about indicting Noah. It's about looking at the behavior and saying, don't try this at home. That's why they're criticizing Noah. They're not criticizing Noah. They're pointing to the behavior and saying, this is not the way to do it. Again, Rabbi Yitzchak's intention is only to prevent a possible misunderstanding later generations. Lest someone think that failing to pray for others isn't the flaw. It could be when there's suffering going on, and the person says, listen, Noah was great. Noah didn't pray. Noah didn't fight with God. Noah didn't even convince anyone to change their ways. I'm going to emulate Noah. I'm Noah. Don't be Noah. Noah was Noah. We don't know exactly why not. He didn't do he did certain things or didn't do certain things, but that's not a lesson for life. And that's what these rabbis are saying. That's why Rabbi Yitzchak insists we must interpret this aspect of Noah as a shortcoming. So when a child studies the Torah portion of Noah, they study not only Noah as a great person, but a shortcoming. Not because we're trying to smear his name. So they should know when a person knows about the suffering of others, they have to do something, even if it's only praying, which isn't physically. Praying is praying, but there's nothing they can do to change them. But they should at least try, not because it was a shortcoming in Noah himself, but to make it absolutely clear that failing to pray for others is a flaw in general. So this is the reason I mentioned that story with Rabbi Levitansky in Santa Monica when the Rebbe's secretary called him is because let's Rabbi Levitansky has passed on. Let's say he was working 19 hours a day, trying to do whatever he could to bring education and awareness to the Jewish community. And he's a human being. He has physical limitations. Let's say he's doing everything. The internal bookkeeping of saying, this is a pressing need. I've done all I can, but that doesn't mean it's not a need. It's something I can do. Before I go to bed, I can pray that for that other people have a certain awareness and openness and emotional availability to God. It should bother us. And that's what Noah, the reason these rabbis criticize Noah. Again, it was not about indicting Noah, but telling us that for the future, we should know that even when we've done all we can, and even when we just can't, we literally can't do certain things, it's something we should carry. We should care. Like if it's our child, or literally our biological sibling or so on, they're in trouble. Even when I go to bed, it's gonna be playing in my mind, and it might disturb my sleep. But the Torah thing is saying, even though everybody hopefully should be able to sleep, we have a personal responsibility to others. We must do everything possible. Must also do everything possible. On text 7, to pray and seek mercy on behalf of another Jew. Now, so this is why Rabbi Yitzchak's view doesn't contradict the principle of judge every person favorably. Why would Rabbi Yitzchak, we asked before, if we're supposed to judge people favorably, why would he judge Noah negatively when we could say that there's a positive way of reading that it was in his generations? It says, even he agrees that Noah had no actual obligation to pray. He's simply emphasizing that for others, in different circumstances, this is a real obligation. Let's say Noah, he was perfect. Let's say he was really good. For us in retrospect, to be able to say, here's a guy who did nothing to help people in suffering, that can't stand. We have to say, here's a guy who was really great, but he did nothing. He couldn't, but maybe you can. Noah should not be that beacon to emulate for the future. If we can't, we can't. So actually, before I go to this, I just want to explain. This is a quote from the Rebbe, but it's a quote on a curious Talmudic. It's a twist on a curious Talmudic statement, which I just want to explain first. The Talmud talks about the responsibility of a guest to hosts. Hosting people in my house. Got to be a bench. Ask if you can help clean up, whatever. There are things you do to be able to be a good guest. The Talmud statement is, whatever your host asks, you should do immediately, except if a host asks you to leave. Now, My host asked me to leave. It's not my house. I shouldn't stay. I shouldn't stay against the host wishes. And the Talmudic commentaries look at it and say, some people say it's a bit, misprint. Like, what does this mean? The way it's understood, there are a few different angles, but I'll just share one thing. The way it's understood is that if someone invited me to their house, it means we have a relationship. If that person's asking me to leave, that means I just did something. So instead of me just walking out, I should say, go and say, what did I do? I'm sorry. How did I hurt you? Fight for the relationship a little bit. So in other words, don't just, oh, he said leave, leave. No, why did he say leave? Think about what went on. So that's the quote. So the Rebbe puts a different twist on that quote for our purposes here. The commentaries explain the meaning of the sage's statement. Whatever the host tells you to do, except leave. On a deeper level, the host refers to God. So God is our host in the world. In all areas of life, we're meant to follow God's instructions, except in one case. If God were to say, leave my presence, God forbid. In that one area, we don't obey, not even God himself, so to speak. What's the Rebbe saying here? The Rebbe is saying that, look, sometimes people act so horribly that the Torah itself says you can hate them. Like I said before, if there's a Jew actively supporting Hamas, who has a stated objective to kill all Jews, starting from those in Israel, the Torah, which is, that's God's word, says at the bottom of the barrel. You don't get worse. Still and all, so in a way, says God saying, you leave my presence. You just took yourself out of the club. And yet, this quote of the Talmud that was saying, you're never out of the club. You don't never believe that what you've done takes you out of the family, and we should never believe that what someone has done takes them out of the family. And that's, even Noah's looking at a corrupt world. It's terrible. What they did was horrible, but you should care enough to say, maybe have some time. We can have coffee and talk a little. Just because you never know what might help someone see things differently. And certainly, at least to pray for them. Now, praying for them tends to be like more a Christian type of, at least in the verbiage, this English verbiage. But in Torah, in Jewish life, of course, we pray for people, pray for people's physical welfare, but also the idea of praying to God, if there's someone we care about, that they have adopt a perspective that's better for them than the one we see that they have, which is self-destructive. That's what we're seeing. And if you look in text 9, this is from the Talmud. There were hooligans in Rabbi Meir's neighborhood. Rabbi Meir was a great rabbi of the Talmud, and these hooligans caused them a great deal of anguish. Rabbi Meir prayed for God to have mercy on him, that they should die. Meir is saying these people they're horrible to me. So he turns to God, says, God, have rachmanus on me, have mercy on me, and you take care of them. You know how to take care of them. He had a brilliant wife named Bruria, or Meir's wife Bruria, and she's famous through history. There's a girls' school in Elizabeth called Bruria. And Meir's wife Bruria said to him, "What is your thinking? Why would you pray that they die, these evil people? Do you base yourself on the verse, let sins cease from the land? It's because since the Psalms say, we turn to God and say, let there be no longer any sins on earth, and now these are people who are sinners, you think you have the right to ask God that they die? But is it written, let sinners cease? It says, let sins cease. We don't ask for the sinners to die. We ask that the sins are ceased to happen. We don't personalize it. even when it's people who are really doing horrible things and affecting us, or affecting, in this case, our marriage. And that's the distinction. And I'm not, again, I don't want to pick on Bernie Sanders too much, but if someone has a perspective that I don't like, that I find really destructive to the Jewish people, and nearly, therefore, really self-destructive, because he's also one of ours. What Brewery is saying is the attitude he's presenting, it is what it is. But don't personalize it. You don't want him dead. You want a change in attitude. You're praying for a change in attitude that can be more of a shared understanding of where things should go, and not something coming from what I will consider a place that is less than moral. Text 10. So this is about the idea of praying for someone to have a better perspective. In text 10, he says, and this is on page 32. This is from a great rabbi of the Talmud who's commenting on that piece of Talmud about Beruria, that woman, her perspective. This raises a serious problem. When a person prays for themselves to return to Shuvah, to righteous practice, it's understandable. If I pray 3 times a day, we say to God, God, help me become better. Help me come to a better place. Help me come to a place of my best self. That's understandable. I'm saying, why? Because even though everything's in the hands of heaven except for fear of heaven, why? I'm not putting it on God. I should be doing it myself. The sages said in the past, a person wants to go there, I want God's help in making myself a better person. That's totally fine theologically. One who wants to become pure is help. So someone who prays to return is included in that. They want to become pure, so they help. So 3 times a day, we say to God, and we'll say it here too, God, help bring me back. Help me maintain a good perspective so that I can do the work of being who you need me to be. But that's about me. When someone prays for another person to do teshuvah, to correct themselves, the question is harder. What can that prayer achieve? Isn't fear of heaven entirely in that person's own hands? So if I'm praying for my sibling who's part of Jewish Voices for Peace, and God forbid, screaming in the street from the river to the sea, what am I? We say it's his soul, her soul, their decision. Where did my prayer come in? So here's the answer: is we say on the story of Bruria, that was the Rabbi Meir's wife, praying that the wicked should repent. The Maharsha, which is the rabbi who was in text 10, raises a question: how could she pray for that if everything is in the hands of heaven except for the respect of heaven? The answer is that she was praying that they wouldn't face tests like poverty or hardship that were pushing them towards sin. There, very often, we speak to people, and this is part of what I my job is often speaking to people about theological things. There is people take theological positions often because of not in an ivory tower. There are experiences. There's trauma. There's a lot that goes on that leads every one of us, that there at least impacts how we see things and whether we're open to hearing something in a clean way, because it's almost, if it's something we've had experience with, it may predispose us towards hearing it, or negatively it disposes towards hearing it. If someone has had um, uh, a series of negative experiences with people who look like me, I'm going to have a much harder time having a clean conversation with them because they have me pegged before I open my mouth. I tell you that because I've had 34 years, actually 58 years, but of experience of that. That's the way it works. We're all like that. We're all like that. So praying, he says, like poverty or hardship, but if especially if a person has had a lot of pain and suffering in their lives, and then I talk to them about God, say, actually, just yesterday, someone by our kiddush was talking to me about a very close friend who just had, lost someone very close to them, and she said, I want to go give them a hug. I think if I mention God, say, God's not on the good list right now, so don't give a hug. The time will come, hopefully. But that I understand that. So, but the prayer is with if I'm thinking about someone who has this negative attitude towards Israel, to make it more contemporary, I don't know what all the factors, but part of it is to pray and try to see if they can ease some of whatever is pointing them in that direction. It's also possible to pray that God arrange for them to hear words of inspiration from righteous people, and that through that they return. You never know. There's, I had mentioned in Shul over Rosh Hashanah, in Kippur, I can't remember when, that shortly before Rosh Hashanah, in the college, I sent out an email. It was about Rosh Hashanah, about showing up in Shul for the high holidays, and about October 7th and the need to stick together and everything. And there's always a few responses, usually nice responses. The one response was just in capitals, Free Palestine. And it was on a Friday, and I was already here, and I saw it, and I asked my secretary, I forwarded it to my secretary. I said, "Can you see who this person is? I don't recognize the name. See any history she has with us? What do we know about her?" And she said, "Oh, she'll check." She said, "Do you want me to take her off the list?" I said, "No." We're going to spam her more, but just just let me know what you know. And she didn't. She couldn't find anything about her. But I responded, as praying for a year where all people are free of external oppression and internal moral confusion, or whatever I wrote there. So we started back and forth. I don't know, it must be 20 things now. But she's coming Wednesday. She's coming to the college for coffee. She actually lives 2 blocks from the college. But just in the course of our conversation, you can see how she's exhaling. And then she after Rosh Hashanah, she wrote to me, "Thank you for sending the boys to my house to blow the shofar." And she gives me the street name. My husband and I, her husband's not Jewish, I'm pretty sure. But she is. Yeah, she had written to me also that her Orthodox grandfather. We've done a lot of deep meaningfuls in the emails, but she thank you for sending. We didn't go to the door, but thank you for bringing the spirit of the holiday. So I wrote to her, that's it's you're experiencing God's sense of humor. I had no idea where you lived. I wasn't even sure you were in New Jersey. I invited you to coffee because I wanted to meet you, but that was not. I didn't send them. They're not my students. And now that I know you live 2 blocks from here, you live in a community, whether you know it or not, of a lot of Chabad people. Those are probably just regular kids home from school, and they're just trying to bring the holiday spirit to the neighbors. They must know you're Jewish. But she appreciated that. And then she's going to come now. Am I going to go and change her mind? I have no idea. And what I told her is, I want to have coffee, not for you to convince me, or me to convince you. Well, just we could talk. To explore, understand, learn from each other. And is it my hope that someone who has taken, who is a very, very painfully anti-Israel stand, that can soften a little bit, through becoming friends with a guy like me? It could. Maybe not, but it's definitely worth a shot. And that's really what we're looking for. Am I sitting here praying for her now? I'm actually not, but I am worrying about her because I never met her, but she's one of ours. And to have one of ours speak so harshly about Israel, it's got to bother us. And that's and just having a coffee and saying there's a human being and who's not trying to go and whatever the horrible words that they use for what's been going on in Gaza, humanize, that can help. I hope. Text 12. This is from another great rabbi. He says, we ought to pray that people who are, as I in the situation we're talking about, return with complete teshuvah and fully rejoin the Jewish people, and then God will remove their heart of stone. Heart of stone is a harsh language, but people are emotionally unavailable to some things. And I get it. I have a childhood friend who was still a friend of his, but he's taken a very different path. Although we went to Jewish school together up until sixth grade, and he once said to me, he said, I wish I could find the feeling and the faith that you have, but it's dead. Now I don't believe it's ever dead, but he was talking about his trauma went on in his class. I get it, but it's not always about the objective assessment of you believe in God and Torah and sign and everything. It's we're bringing a lot of baggage, and sometimes that creates what he's calling a heart of stone. And that's why we pray every day in 3 times a day in text 13. Bring us back, our Father, to your Torah. Draw us close, our King, to your service, and return us in complete teshuvah before you. Blessed are you, God, who desires teshuvah. Are we asking God to do our moral work for us? No. We're asking God to help us unshackle ourselves of the baggage, because often the baggage gets in the way. Text 14. It seems to me, that's not a great rabbi, earlier generation, the 1600s. It also seems to me in our case, this is a case of a father and son who both chose, because of the pressure. The 1600s were a very difficult time to be a Jew. They decided to go and convert to Christianity because there was a lot of pressure. So there's a question about praying, whether it's okay to pray for them to recognize their heritage and return to the Jewish community. So he says like this: it seems in our case, a father may certainly pray for a son. We were talking about a father and son who went away. What if it was a father whose son left? If it's the case of a parent praying for a child, they can certainly pray for the child. After all, a son brings merit to the father. There's no pain greater than this. As to the other case, which we're talking about now, where the child was taken along with him, both of them went to out of to a different religion. It is also permitted to pray on the child's behalf. After all, we are allowed to pray for another person's physical suffering, and much so for the pain, for God's pain of the Shekhinah. And since the Shekhinah is God's presence, and since this child is young, we're considered as adoptive parents, and the responsibility falls on us. Given that there's no hope for the child's return unless his father also returns, it follows that we should also pray for the father as well, so the child not be lost amongst them. Now, final text is text 15. This is from the Rabbi. Rabbi Yitzchak teaches us a powerful lesson. It's possible that Noah truly did all he could, that objectively Noah was really impeccable, not only in his own mind, but fully in line with the code of Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch. He did everything right. It's possible that Noah there's nothing to pick on. Still, for posterity, we must know it's not enough. We must never be satisfied with doing what's technically sufficient. We have to keep sounding the call. Even so, Noah should have pleaded for mercy on the people. Not praying for your generation is a moral failure. This very awareness creates the merit, and God removes the obstacles creating the negative situation. He creates new opportunities for us to ask for mercy on behalf of others until we succeed in awakening them to do teshuvah. So I'll leave it over there. It was. Oh, I'm sorry. There are comments in the chat. I'm sorry, I didn't ignore them. I just didn't see them. So maybe it's the same thing. When Abraham prayed for people in Sodom, what advantageous standing that they have versus people in Noah's generation? The only thing that comes to mind is they were descendants of Shem. I don't know that the people in Sodom had any advantage over the people in Noah's generation. What we're saying is that Abraham had an advantage. Maybe that's what you're saying. Abraham had the advantage that there were people before him who were righteous. Noah being one, Shem being another. As far as the people who with the behavioral problems, both in Sodom or in Noah's generation, I don't know that there's a distinction between them. I'm not sure I answered your question. Maybe Noah couldn't actually perceive God flooding the earth with water. It seems like he did believe it. Although, well, you know something, you say what you say, Andrew, actually has. I take that back. The Medrash says that he, at least one opinion, that he didn't think it was actually going to happen until it started raining. But he did build. He put a lot of effort into building a boat. So, assuming it was something in the back of his mind, but his working assumption was that this was going to happen. So, we'll leave it. Actually, what I was gonna share. Any questions? No. Remember the Rebbe sharing a story with the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and back in Russia. There were Jews always were and disadvantaged, and part of what the Rebbes they were the teachers of Torah, but they were really trying to take care of people, leaders of people who were poor and persecuted. So the Rebbe said that the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe sent a few community leaders to intercede with this was before the Bolsheviks, with the Tsar's office cabinet members on behalf of the Jewish community, because there was a pressing danger. They came back and said we were unsuccessful. So he said, and which one of you fainted? They said, what do you mean? He said, the Jewish people are in danger. We need you to save it. They said, no, you can't control them. But how did you take it? He said, oh, no, okay, I'm going back. He said, how? I mean, he wasn't criticizing them. He said, you have to see this as your life is on the line. Well, they say, no, but think in your heels. That was an attitude that they had towards our approach, and obviously in our own way towards community. Even though I can, taking care of myself is a big job. Taking care of my family is a bigger job, but the needs out there have to matter. And if there's something I can do, at least I can care and pray. And then sometimes there is something we can do. And that's what the lesson was, that admire Noah, but don't be Noah. Sure. Yeah.
Hamas is robbery in Hebrew.
Yes.
Any relation to the terrorists?
No idea. I just mentioned it because it's interesting. I doubt they took that as their name, and I think robbery is the least of their problems.
Well, yeah, I found that remarkable.
It's yeah.
Okay.
I wish it meant beheading would be much more, or something like that, but it'd be more apropos. But it's that's why I mentioned it, because
I'll ask Joe Chasman. Ends up being a weekly thing, but Hebrew
yeah.
is, I forget the exact title, but he takes Hebrew words and In fact, he was talking about, this week, the hostages. And the root word. Shin up. Resh. Which is where Shachari comes from. It's the dawn.
Yeah, oh, I mean, one of the hostages.
No, the
word for
word for hostages is being used because they're letting go. They're releasing them. And,
Oh, freedom. Shichrur. The hostage is chatuf. But it could be that it's the word for freeing, which is that's shichrur.
Yeah.
Shichrur. Yeah, got it.
so so I'm gonna ask him about the
Got
Hamas.
it. A great week.
Separate question, has nothing to do.
Yeah, go ahead, Janice. Oh, no.